Good afternoon. This is going to be an international panel. It'll be moderated in English to enable our panelists to speak freely. If you need interpretation equipment, you can collect your receivers outside. And now I'll switch into English.
And I would like to invite our panelists to join me here. And first one is Zuzana Kaparová, representative of European Investment Bank in Slovakia. Welcome. Then I would like to invite Veronika Kasalová. She's investment manager in Meridian Fund in Paris. Veronika, welcome. Sean Duckers from FTI Consulting in London. Sean, welcome. And last but not least, Josh Cameron from FTI as well, from London, but spending a lot of time in New Zealand and other parts of the world. Thank you, Josh. Good, so we have heard quite a lot, and I believe also thanks to the interpretation, and thank you to our interpreter here. You heard a lot about what is happening in Slovakia, about the issues ranging from investment deficit in water infrastructure to problems with the state strategy, with the lack of or maybe not so optimal regulations, etc., etc. And now we would like to look at this Slovak reality from the international perspective. What are best practices in other countries of the world? How do we finance water infrastructure? How do we manage water infrastructure? And just sharing what you believe would be relevant for us in Slovakia to learn from. So I would like to start with Zuzana Kaparová. Zuzana has been with the European Investment Bank for quite a long time, but now she represents EIB in Slovakia. I was honored to be vice president of the EIB in Luxembourg. It's a great institution, a bank of the European Union, owned by the 27 members of the European Union, working in all the countries of EU, but also outside of the European Union, with financing over 100 billion euro per year, I guess. But anyway, a lot of projects in the water and infrastructure area. So maybe, Zuzana, if you could tell us a little about how EIB is looking at water infrastructure, what kind of projects, what parameters are you taking into account when considering different projects, please?
Thank you very much, and good morning to everybody. I'm happy to be here with you, and thank you very much, Vasil, for all this introduction of EIB, European Investment Bank. We are the climate bank, and water is one of our priorities. So as it was said last year, it was almost 90 billion of euros we as a bank invested and spent, and in water it was more than 4 billion euros. Within the couple of last years, I would say it really varies and range around 3 billion per year to be invested in water. And when we speak about water, it's really like the whole water cycle. So water, not only water supply, but also water treatment, flood, etc. So water is the priority, and we have a lot of examples in EU, in Europe, but we also work outside. So we also work as a we are one of the, or even larger, or the largest financier and lender globally. And you see the numbers are quite big. And we are project-oriented bank, so we are really, our products are created for the projects. And okay, when we speak, and let's speak about EU situation and EU experiences. So we have many projects and like in these countries, and we heard a lot about the setup, you know, if to be the public ownership, if to privatize, etc., etc. I would say from this perspective, for us as the EIB, it doesn't matter. We somehow work with the different setups, and really these setups varies in Europe and also globally, but like within Europe, you don't have a single or same solutions. So it's just, and our perspective and our experiences, we can handle like all type of systems. So I think this is the first important topic for the discussion. The second one, it's really about the good strategies, about the good projects, and thinking somehow globally and take into account different aspects. Because like when we speak about water supply, water treatment, and especially in these days, we see an issue and a deepening of crisis with water globally, but also it has started in Europe. And I think it was Vasil who said during the first panel that we somehow take it here, water like for granted, right? And something which is like normal, and like water belongs to our like basic standards. It's true, but we need to think a bit in a wider perspective, because really climate change is here. All this, what is related to water aspects, is changing, and I think this is also what needs to be discussed and handled from the water companies. And this is why I speak about sustainable projects and really like thinking wider. Good examples, and as it was said, we do work a lot in this area. We have many projects these days, for example, in Poland, but I don't need to go further. We have now a project with the Czech Republic. It's about wastewater treatment in Brno area. We have projects in Baltics. We work with Romanian authorities. Definitely there are many projects in Italy, Spain, Portugal, the south of Europe, where really water is becoming a critical product or a critical topic. And our experience is really, the need is to cooperate together, to speak with each other. It's true that in Europe, the water is kind of like a right, you know. But we, on one hand, this is why we need to think about affordable prices and really not to lag behind the most resilient, part of the society. On the other hand, there are water services linked with, usage of water, and this needs to be correctly but fairly priced, So the discussion is really wide, and cooperation, especially also with the regulators, because it's somehow regulated area everywhere, is needed, but to be on a decent grounds, and really it can't be just one way. It needs to go, and to have involved all the stakeholders around.
Excellent. Thank you very much. Thank you, Zana. I think it's very clear. And it's great that EIB, as a so-called climate bank, is investing so much, 3 billion in water infrastructure. As you mentioned, what is important for you as an investor is to have clear strategy, good regulations, and good projects. And regulation was mentioned in the previous panels several times. So I would like to now move to Sean Duckers. Sean has been working with different regulators, in particular in UK. Oxwot is what in Slovakia would be URSO. There are many complaints about URSO here today. Maybe if you could tell us a little more about how Oxwot is managing this situation in UK, but also maybe beyond the UK. What is the experience with regulators, and what does it mean to have good regulations?
Thanks. I just want to start by saying thanks for inviting me. Glad to speak to everyone today. In terms of kind of good regulation, I think the key word is legitimacy. So that means from all stakeholders. So, that means consumers pay a fair price, but they also get a good service. Companies know the rules of the game, and then investors get a fair rate of return. I think that's the key signs of a good regulatory framework. How you navigate that and how you achieve that is kind of maybe a difficult question. Ofwat are trying to navigate that themselves currently. They have got the current price control, which is coming up for review. And how are they navigating it is a good question. So in the UK in particular at the minute, we also have a big investment challenge. So in the UK, companies need to spend about 100 billion euros across 5 years. That's a lot of money. And that might mean a big increase in bills. However, they need to balance that with the fact that there is a long-term need to provide good quality water services. So what the approach Ofwat have done is they've tried to set a rate of return that's fair for investors, so they can finance the investments required, but then they also try and reduce the price impact where possible by potentially lowering the short-term bill impacts, potentially deferring those bill impacts more into the future if possible. So that's kind of been trying the trade-off, and the issue has been just trying to get consumer buy-in on the price increases. That's been the main issue they've been trying to navigate. But they are trying to do that a bit better by just saying we need to pay for increases. But in the UK, like it is here, it's quite a political issue in that water affects everyone on a daily basis. We all know that. We feel the impacts of it straight away. We turn on the tap, we need the water, it needs to be clean, drinkable. Sewerage as well is an issue. So that is the kind of the key issue. But Ofwat have been trying to convince stakeholders like consumers by saying we're taking a long-term view. These investments are needed today to make sure, in 30 years' time, we don't have a cliff edge. We don't have the water kind of taps just run out of water. And that's been a key issue that Ofwat are trying to sell. And that's been an issue for all regulators across kind of Ofwat, but also in Scotland, where it's regulated slightly differently, where the Scottish Government owns the water company, but there they've had to also say we need to increase prices because we need to invest for the future. But they've managed to do that and get consumer buy-in by kind of giving that clear view and clear message. And I think that's also a key part is if you have a clear kind of message you're giving to everyone, stakeholders, like consumers and also investors, that helps to kind of also bring in that the legitimacy and also kind of helps to convince everyone to come along with you. I think that's a key issue with this.
Thank you. Thank you, Sean. I think you pointed to one of the kind of painful aspects of any management of infrastructure business, which is and regulated business, which is the connection between regulations and price. And obviously, this is something which in politics plays an important role, especially in politics where you have a lot of populism, and I think this is not only in Slovakia. So I want to ask you, and I'm moving to the next panelist, Josh Cameron, who is in charge of policies, advising on policies in different governments, UK, New Zealand, and around the world. What do you see? What kind of trends in terms of strategies, government regulations, but policies more on a kind of strategic level? How do politicians deal with this issue of okay, you have regulations which are future-oriented, which help to create profits for water companies, but on the other hand, you have impact on higher prices, and you have people who are unhappy, probably.
Yeah. Well, again, thank you very much for having me. And I think the one lesson I would take across all of this is that politically, it's very, very hard to get this right. We have seen a number of international examples where there have been severe and recognised problems with the structure of provision of water, be it drinking water, wastewater, etc. But whereas everyone might be able to agree on the nature of the problem, as soon as you start moving towards a new solution, whoever it is you happen to be asking to pay for that solution or changing the structure of control, it becomes very politically fraught very quickly. You mentioned the New Zealand example, which, a country of 4.5 million people with water infrastructure across the 3 different kinds of waters controlled by local governments, about 100 or so across such a small population with all their own overlapping issues and no proper independent regulator. This led almost inevitably really to a horrible contamination of drinking water scandal in one particular part of the country, a recognition of a need for change. And initially you had the government driving towards a more centralised model with four regional bodies across the country that would still control the water, and local governments could voluntarily opt to be part of that, which all looked very popular. So they came up with that model, and then partway through the reforms they changed that model. So it was now going to be compulsory for all local governments, because they'd failed to anticipate the scale that would be needed in order to make it work. And it was now going to have a governance structure which significantly decreased the amount of, say, local governments would now have over their water infrastructure in favour of other stakeholder groups. And this caused an absolute uproar and became a huge political issue. The then government under Jacinda Ardern pushed through with it, and it became a major issue in the last election in 2023. So I think that model, well, when it was passed into law, the law stood for about a year, and then the government lost power, and the new government coming in just completely reversed everything that had been done and is now looking at new models. But unfortunately, the idea of privatisation is politically toxic as well. And that, if you look to the UK example as well, where privatised, I think, in 1989, where the state had run all of the water infrastructure. UK was one of the worst in Western Europe in terms of quality and pollution and so forth, and massive underinvestment from the Treasury, just $2 billion a year, I think. Privatisation, on the face of it, certainly worked in that you had a big uptick in investment. Defenders of privatisation will point to all the improvements that happened in quality and pressure and unplanned outages of supply decreasing. But it's still, by the time 1997 rolled around, the incoming Labour government was still able to successfully demonise water company bosses by putting out a whole bunch of stories about their bonuses and their fees and what have you, and then impose an extra tax on them to extract some of that back. As has been noted, Scotland waters remain in public ownership over that period, and initially massively underperformed, I think, the England and Wales case studies in terms of investment and so forth. But now, at least in terms of public perception and politics, the private water companies in the UK are deeply unpopular. There is 83% support, I think, for renationalisation of water infrastructure. And there's a constant flow of stories about wastewater leakages and sewer dumping and so forth. And nobody, of course, remembers how bad things were back in 1989 when it first came about, because those improvements to quality and perhaps the investment has not been seen to be going in the last few years. So it is politically fraught, and if the public isn't carried with you, then water companies become a very, very easy political target as people feel entitled to water. They resent paying for it, and they don't understand the level of investment that's required, but they do not like the consequences when that investment does not happen. So it's one of the more dangerous areas for people to invest in when we think about political risk to that investment.
Very interesting. It looks like there is no ideal model. Each of them has some pluses and minuses. The private one, okay, able to generate good investments, but then becoming unpopular because the prices go up and people are unhappy. On the other hand, the public model obviously has its own downside. So it's very interesting. Maybe we can discuss more later in our discussion on these pluses and minuses, because we also have some questions via Slido on this topic. But before we do that, I would like to move to Veronica, because she comes really from private sector, heavy private sector side, from Meridian Fund, which is a huge fund investing equity in including in infrastructure projects. And maybe it would be interesting to hear from you how do you select the projects into which you are investing in Europe, but also beyond, and what for you is a good model as an investor, from the investor perspective, what is a good model of such infrastructure company, especially in the water area?
Yes, thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here as one of the representatives of the private sector. I would like to also add that I not only work for Meridian on the business development, but I'm also the finance director of a PPP project via Pribina in Slovakia. So to add on what Meridian does is we just not invest in the project, but we do also the active daily management of the project. So we really need to make sure that all our projects work, and in many projects we are with EIB. So to comment on that, well, evidently Via Prebina is a highway, is a motorway, so I'm not a water specialist, but within Meridiam we do invest in energy sector, including water, and full disclosure, we are one of the shareholders of Suez. So we do have some experience in water, but also energy, sustainable mobility and social infrastructure, health, education projects. I think water is not that different to other sectors. That's what we can conclude. As many other investors, not speaking just for Meridiam, there are many models that you can use. We are happy to review all different structures. I think all of them will need to have in common strong political support because the projects that we are looking at many times are very heavy on capex. We are speaking about above 50 million euro, hundreds billions in some cases, which means that preparation of these kind of projects take multiple years, and from the start of the preparation until construction, it takes 2, maybe sometimes 3 political cycles. So you really need to have a strong support. And just to mention, we work also quite frequently with municipalities. And within municipalities, we see that it really helps that if there is some strong person driving the project further. Unless there is this push from inside, then it's an issue. To further comment on, well, how do we select the projects? Well, first of all, there needs to be a clear need. And the need needs to be identified in a very detailed manner. Many times we speak with municipalities and there still hasn't been made a decision whether the asset, the infrastructure is supposed to be in ownership of the city or not, or they would like to take over. And many times, well, what we advise during the open market consultations is that, well, if you are able to do the renewals and upgrades of the infrastructure, then you should be responsible, but otherwise you need to outsource anything that where you don't have this capacity. But to move on maybe earlier in the project stage, where we see a big problem or room for improvement, that's how we call it, is the readiness on the side of the public authority, the municipalities, public entities to prepare good projects, to have the administrative capacity, that's the staff, the people there doing the projects. And secondly, also have a good understanding what is the asset, what is the technical condition of the asset, so that we as investors, when we come in, we know what are the risks associated with this specific infrastructure, whether it's water or anything else. And then we know how to deal with it within our contracts. But unless this is in place, it's very hard to put in, to implement a good project. And I think I would like to praise EIB because you guys, you have a specific department. Maybe you can comment on that.
Yeah, no, thanks a lot, Veronika. So if I may jump in. So, it's true, like our role, we are not just the financing arm of EU, but we also have all this expertise and, you know, our employees are not just the bankers or economists, but we do have, like, I think these days it's more than 35 people really like water specialists in these areas. So we have many engineers, you know, experts in the different areas. We have environmental experts, social experts, etc., etc. And it's true that, and it's somehow increasing, our support is also advisory and technical assistance. So what we offer together with, you know, other products is also like this capacity building, but also help with preparation or implementation of the project. Because as Veronica said, like we speak about, you know, tens to hundreds of millions euros and, you know, large scale projects. So it takes time, it needs really expertise and this cooperation on different levels, as I highlighted at the beginning. So it's true, and this is why we are here also as well. We have all these experiences, good practices from different projects, and, you know, not only in EU but also outside. And this is what we are trying to bring, because it doesn't need to, you know, think and, you know, to start from the scratch, because if there is already a technology or a project which is working, it needs some kind of adaptation to the different, you know, national environment and legislation. But it's like the knowledge is there, and we are trying to help and support for this. So thank you very much for mentioning us.
Great, thank you. Thank you very much. So this was the first round of kind of introductory remarks. I think we can move to discussion, questions. Please, if you have any questions, raise your hands. But there are several questions on Slido. One question is, it's really up to you who wants to respond, but probably somewhere between Josh and Sean, but not only. According to your opinion, what are the kind of most appropriate forms of ownership of the water infrastructure, and what type of regulation? I don't know. Who wants to start? Yeah, okay, Sean. Let's try.
I guess in terms of ownership, that's probably a loaded question. So in the UK, there is a mixture of different forms of ownership. So that includes nationalised, so companies like Welsh Water, Scottish Water, they're all owned by the state or not-for-profit. Then you obviously have your private sector, and there's a mixture between publicly listed on a stock exchange and privately owned by private equity. In terms of like what's the best, I can't really give you a definitive answer, but I can tell you that like in the UK, the experience has been actually that the publicly listed companies, the ones that are listed on a stock exchange, do the best. They typically perform the best of everyone in terms of operationally and also financially. Why that is open for guessing, but there seems to be some sort of signaling from the market that they get good pressures and they kind of are able to get the best staff, and also kind of that public pressure creates better environment for performance. But I'm not saying that that's the best model for avoidance of doubt, because, you know, other companies also do well. And we do see a mixture also of public-private partnerships as well, like in Jersey, where the company again performs very well, and it's a mixture of ownership. In terms of the best regulation, maybe that's something I can comment on more. I think in the UK in particular, there was maybe bad regulation in the past 10, 20 years, and that was maybe too much of a focus on cost efficiency. So obviously, consumers want to pay the lowest price for their water, and I think that's the same in every country. No one wants to overpay for their water. However, too much of a focus on cost efficiency can kind of neglect that you need to think about the future and the investment you need to keep the network running. And I think that was a big issue for the past, in particular for the 10 years, because of the political headaches, as Josh was saying, around water. There is even more a drive to keep bills low, but then when you need to invest, it gets more difficult to try and convince consumers that you need to increase bills when you've given such a focus on keeping bills down. So I think the best regulation typically is a holistic approach, whereby you kind of balance the fact that you need to keep bills low, but you need to think about the future as well. And I think that's good regulation typically is that kind of holistic approach of kind of long-term mixed with the short-term. That's what I would say.
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I mean, you know, you're talking about a natural monopoly, right? That's where the consumer cannot choose to go in a different direction for an improvement in quality or a decrease in cost. So whether you are in public provision or whether we're talking about public ownership or private ownership, I mean, we've got plenty of case studies of how easy it is to get it wrong either way. And what those case studies, I think, all have in common is a lack of adequate and properly focused investment, and again, driven by a either the inadequate or ill-directed regulation that doesn't encourage the right incentives, as Sean has said, or by just a lack of sophistication in understanding the need for that investment. So if I was to give, regardless of who, of the structure, be it private or public, I think excessive fragmentation is a problem, because I think it waters down, if you'll forgive the expression, the levels of sophistication in governance as people, perhaps smaller companies or smaller local operators have less understanding of or less expertise within them to generate the necessary investment, and less of a balance sheet to bring on extra capital. But I agree with Sean again that the publicly listed companies seem to have done better in the UK, and I wonder in part whether that's because the regulator just culturally was better at understanding the interests and incentives and dealing with a publicly listed company than perhaps the regulator has been at dealing with privately held companies. But basically, I think here we perhaps focus on the wrong thing if we focus on ownership structure, because the key is the regulatory structure, and a regulatory structure which encourages and demands long-term thinking and long-term investment, rather than, as Sean says, a focus on price points and immediate costs, because that's what's led to all sorts of trouble. And people will accept a slightly higher bill if they know it's to address a long-term investment problem in the water infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Zuzana, please.
Maybe if I just may jump with like the financing perspective, because it's clear, and we heard different numbers during today, like the investment gap of Slovakia, 10 billions, I was speaking about 4 billions of our investments yearly. There is a need on EU level up to 150 billions of euros in both water supply or wastewater treatments, etc., etc. So these are huge investments, and it's clear it's not going to be possible just with public money. This is why also EIB is here to attract the private capital, and to encourage and involve private sector in this area. And I said it also at the beginning of my intervention, we can, and we work with different setups. It's really not about the setup. It's about the concrete projects and concrete needs. And in our opinion, it's clear we need to do this private and public money together. And also additional thing, which is, I think, very important and to be even discussed here, it's not just about the normal infrastructure. These days, it's even more important really to think with innovation, to bring the newest technologies, to have really efficient efficient resource taking, or we need to look in water as something which really is not here for granted. There are many aspects related, and we see related with climate change. We have droughts in some parts of Europe, we have floods in others, and I don't need to go further because we experienced here this topic as well. So it really needs to be a wider approach and different aspects to at least being discussed in this specific water sector, because just pure modernization or new it's fine, but it's really connected with other things, and all this needs to be taken into account. And the financing is important because these are huge amounts, and involvement of private sector is a need, is a must.
Thank you. Please, Veronika, anything to add to this topic?
If I may quickly.
Yeah, please.
I can add on to what Zuzana said. Involving a private side definitely allows you to tap into the innovative technologies, which are extremely important in water sector to reduce water loss or improve data collection, and then improve the life cycle and renewal program. And this is, I think, regardless of whether we are speaking about the private sector owning the infrastructure or not. There can be contracts just for technical services provision or management services. But then on the other hand, and just to comment on how to ensure that the projects are effectively operating and that the operability is high, you need to also, as a public body, implement robust performance standards for the private side, which means that you set up a list of very detailed KPIs and service quality requirements, which if the private side, if the concessionaire in a PPP project, for example, does not comply, then it costs him money. So there is a high motivation, and but on the other hand, you need to have also a capable people on the side of municipalities or governments to be able to monitor and oversight that whether the project performance standards are complied with or not. And I think I would like to highlight also the work of Ministry of Transport, who is doing this on the motorways. So if we can set up something like this for the water sector, that would be clearly beneficial.
Thank you. We'll have to ask ta3 to decide. I know that Zuzka, you have to go for a meeting outside of Bratislava, so thank you for joining us.
Thank you very much. Apologize, and hopefully we will continue in this discussion, and this will be just opening for
just
additional starting point. So looking forward, and EIB is here to help and support also in Slovakia. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. Have a good journey. But we continue with our panel. One important point which was raised by both Veronika and Zuzka is about innovation, that for water management companies to grow, to be responsible owners and managers of this infrastructure, they also need to invest in a modern way to bring innovations, new technologies. This area is growing significantly and very fast. I'm wondering, because this is a kind of question, and actually it is also one of the questions from Slido, whether regulated companies can invest into non-regulated areas. There are examples, at least I know examples from energy sector. For example, Czech energy company has a fund called InVen, which is investing into innovative energy companies, but most of them actually outside of Czech Republic, to get more innovation, more ideas, more technologies from these investments. MOL has its own kind of innovation fund. MOL is the petrochemical company. Verbund, which is Austrian energy company nearby, they have also a fund which is investing. It's a kind of venture capital fund. I will be at their conference on Thursday in Vienna. So there are these type of examples, but do you know of any also in the water area? And is this kind of normal that regulated companies invest in non-regulated areas? Maybe should we start? Sean, please.
So in terms of investing in unregulated areas, there is kind of a push to do this from Ofwat in certain respects. So in the UK, they have unregulated business retail, so retailers who are in businesses are not protected in the same way as consumers are in the households. And the idea was that...
So how is Ofwat pushing companies to invest into this non-regulated in what way?
Yeah, they're trying to unregulate it so that you kind of create scope for innovation. Okay. So the idea being that you also have new entrants who can come into the market. So new firms might try and operate in the business retail sector, but that kind of opens innovation by kind of not limiting you to the 17 or 18 water companies that exist, but allowing others to come in and try and find new ways of doing things and trying to innovate in terms of management and also kind of tariff design. So we have seen that some new water companies in the UK have been created to try and innovate and also push the incumbents to innovate further. So that is going on. And then there is another part of it is that they are allowed to invest in non-regulated things. So what we saw is that water companies have actually innovated in floating solar farms. So they have a lot of land that they own and a lot of reservoirs. And obviously you can kind of innovate on the energy side by kind of deploying solar farms on your land to help lower your energy bills, which also then helps consumers, but also helps the company into operationals and kind of meeting the price caps. So what we are seeing is that there is a kind of encouragement to innovate in certain areas, so energy and also particular sectors, and that is a kind of maybe a drive there. And I think also maybe another thing is that you can also import innovation from other countries if you needed to. So we saw in like Estonia with I'm going to butcher the pronunciation, but Tallinna Vesi, that their initial ownership structure was kind of a joint venture between the city of Tallinn and then also international water investors. So that was like United Utilities in the UK. And what we saw there was that kind of innovation was brought in, kind of bringing in best practice, kind of innovating in the country, and that helped to improve the water sector. And then eventually they exited out, and it became once again a publicly owned company, largely majority. And that kind of helped to drive innovation in the country. So kind of there are two ways of kind of, one is encouraging innovation in the country, but also importing it is also a potential avenue as well.
George, on a policy side, these were very useful examples. Thank you, Sean. But on the kind of from the political perspective, yes, a politician would say, well, I mean, you have this investment deficit in billions of euros or dollars, so you should invest any money you have into this, into infrastructure, and what is the regulated business and why we were created. So how would you justify kind of politically, yes, that you go beyond to the non-regulated area?
Yeah, that can be really challenging under political scrutiny. So, for example, there's a focus in the UK on more accurate metering in households, which is great. It gives people more control over what they use and therefore over their bills. But whenever perhaps there is a drought situation or a long dry spell, and there's hose pipe bans put in place, and you know the companies are quick to call on that kind of response when people also point to, hold on a minute, we're losing 15 to 30% of our water supply and leakages due to underinvestment. So there's a deep kind of skepticism, I think, politically in this sector for anything that goes outside of the basic provision when there's a sense that the basic provision isn't being done well. I do think there is some scope for people to I do think there is scope and less skepticism when that innovation is around consumer control, like metering, like circumstances where you're saying to the ultimate user, here's a way in which you can have a bit more control and a bit more understanding of your usage. But I think in order to have that space to engage in innovative activities, you have to be able to get the basic provision right first. Otherwise, you're going to be faced with a deeply skeptical political class, and they will then lean on the regulator to perhaps, which will be more suspicious of any kind of innovations or investments outside of your normal flow that's there, because everyone's always going to ask, okay, you're investing over here, but what about these leaks? What about the wastewater that's being pumped in untreated because you didn't have sufficient wastewater treatment? Until you get the basics right, that innovation could be quite difficult, which is a vicious cycle, of course, because it's those innovative solutions that are needed to address some of those problems that you have, the basic problems.
Veronica, any examples from your side that you can come up with in investing into non-regulated, by-regulated?
I think no particular comments on that side. In our view, as long as it's in line with the legislative framework and it's allowed, then no particular concern. The issue that we face is the rapidity of changing regulation. quite understandable key investment rationale for us is stability of a revenue stream. So when our cash flows can be impacted by frequent changes of law, then that's an issue. So, yeah.
Please, if any questions, please. Yeah.
Poviem to po slovensky, lebo nebudem sa tváriť, že viem dobre anglicky. Hej. Moje meno je Jozef Legen, ja som bol riaditeľom kohezného fondu, keď sme vstupovali do Európskej únie. Chcel by som položiť otázku túto kolegom, asi nasledovnú. My sme sa v projektoch eurofondov zaväzovali k zvyšovaniu poplatkov za vodné a stočné, tak, aby v priebehu zhruba 20 až 30 rokov sa dosiahla taká cena, že vlastne tie spoločnosti by už mali byť financované zo svojich tržieb ako celá ich činnosť. Čiže malo by to byť udržateľné. Toto nebolo dodržané, samozrejme, z politického hľadiska. Dneska sme v situácii, keď napríklad by regulátor povedal, že zisk je oprávnený iba vtedy, keď hospodárenie spoločnosti je udržateľné z tej tržieb, tak 40 rokov by nemohli mať žiaden zisk. Takže ako by ste reagovali ako finančné inštitúcie vlastne akože s investíciami alebo s pôžičkami do takýchto spoločností? Čo by ste teda navrhovali ako riešenie?
Not sure if I should continue in Slovak or English. I think when I was invited into this platform, we were thinking about what would be the solution that we could propose for situations where you have a huge investment debt and the affordability of water price is a key concern. Then in that case, well, the easy response was really to do a public-private partnership, just like we have in Via Pribina on the motorway. Because in that case, you know, the ownership still remains on the public side. We are not the owners of the infrastructure, but we are responsible for the construction, design, finance, maintenance, and operation of the assets. And at the end of our concession of our contract, we are obliged to transfer the asset to the Ministry of Transport in a condition which is almost as new. So the Slovak government will not have to do anything for another 10 years. So this would be a solution. If we were to look into an investment where we are facing low returns, if this would be a new, without any guarantee payment or additional payments from the public side or from the government or the municipalities, so the economic model would not work there, then probably this would not be an investment where any sensible investor would be willing to go into. I think that's quite an honest answer. We are private sector and we are not a non-profit organization. But to organize a PPP model for a water sector, I think that's a sensible solution. However, as I mentioned earlier, strict performance standards and quality requirements on the concessionaire are a total a must, but also a very robust contractual framework to make sure that the risks are tailor-made for the situation and that there is a sensible division of responsibilities between the public side and the private side. Maybe one other aspect that we did not still mention, and I would like to address a comment from Slovenská sporiteľňa, is that even for this type of projects, we are able to attract very long-term financings from EIB, but also from other institutions, because we are able to structure them as a project, not as a corporate debt. So this means we are able to raise money with the tenors of 20-25 years, which then quite significantly reduces the money needed for amortization of the infrastructure.
Thank you very much. Just for Josh on, so basically the question was, but it was answered by Veronica, but the question was because 20-30 years ago, as was mentioned, there was a strategy kind of prepared and presented to the European Union where Slovakia would, through the regulations, would assure that within that period of time, the water management companies would basically be able to self-finance themselves. But this is not the situation because of political and other changes. We haven't achieved this, and basically now these companies cannot generate any profit. And the question was, how do you finance this type of companies? And I think the PPP example or model could be part of the solution. Probably not the whole infrastructure. The same like in transport, you cannot do every road as a PPP exercise, but maybe some parts of the water infrastructure could be dedicated as for such PPP projects. But I think this is something, yes, for the government to decide. But are there any, maybe Sean or Josh, any idea, any examples of such PPP projects?
Anyone who's been to London in the past maybe 5-10 years would have seen, along the Thames, you would have seen these big cranes, and basically there is this project called Thames Tideway Tunnel, which is a giant sewer, and it's going to cost about £5 billion, so I think it's about 6 billion euros, and that is a PPP essentially, in that the incumbent water company, Thames Water, could not afford to finance it themselves, so it was carved out of their kind of project mix, and it was raised under a private kind of consortium. They raised project-specific debt, and they have a stable regulatory regime of about 100 years. They raise very long-term debt, like 50 years, and also funding from the EIB. And this has been considered quite a big success in the UK kind of infrastructure world, because there's competition, innovation, huge project being delivered under a PPP. I agree that it's really suitable for larger projects. And what is going on now is Ofwat trying to roll out a similar model for larger projects where they can kind of use private capital to help diversify the funds available across the sector, because obviously companies can only raise so much finance themselves. So if you kind of carve things out, potentially you can diversify the pool of capital available and increase it further, which when you've got a big investment need, that's kind of helpful, I think, for governments and also for the companies themselves to try and reduce the kind of pressures they're under.
Maybe one question, because this is also mentioned in Slido. The question is about issuing bonds as a form of financing, which was for the first time applied in Slovakia by the Eastern Slovak water management company. Is this something that is rare? Is it usual, normal, abnormal? How do you see it?
Obviously, I'm used to the UK, where it's a privately owned kind of company, so it's obviously more normal maybe to see bonds being issued. I think, so obviously the bonds, there are kind of pros and cons. So one is, a pro that's often missed is that it kind of helps to enforce good behaviours on the management company, because you've got to meet those interest payments every month. But obviously that relies on having enough revenues initially set that you can actually earn a profit to pay your debt holders. So that's kind of maybe point one. There is the flip side, that if you set too loose regulation or set profits that are too high, they might overextend themselves with leverage, and we are seeing that currently in the UK with certain water companies. Thames Water is the main example at the minute. That has got about £16 billion of debt currently issued on about a £20 billion capital base. That's a lot of leverage, and it's currently got operational issues, and how you finance that when you've got a large debt pile then creates issues and headaches for the regulator. So kind of, I think debt is okay, but obviously there might be a limit you want to kind of allow companies to issue. Maybe that's, set based on precedents and what you think is irrelevant level, maybe based on credit rating agency kind of criteria, but kind of maybe you don't fall asleep at the wheel if they are issuing bonds. They are useful for like kind of discipline, but also you need to make sure that they kind of don't go too far, is what I would say.
Yeah, I think as has happened in the UK, the narrative is a dangerous one with the bonds, whereas with the project-specific debt, as has been mentioned, it can be tied publicly and in the minds of political decision makers to a specific piece of infrastructure which is very clear. And it's amazing on the Thames Tunnel project the extent to which there's been consistent political support for that. And it was a controversial choice to go with what was a very expensive, very ambitious project, but there's been consistent political support throughout, and that's remained stable. On the more general debt financing that some of the water companies have got into, it's now a major political point used to attack the current model and indeed private ownership more generally. The way the narrative is being treated, because that's more generalised debt rather than project-specific, is the suggestion is that debt has been raised to pay out dividends. And the figures, when they're quoted in media or quoted by opponents of the private sector, are, here's 45 billion of industry debt, and over that same period, the industry has paid out X amount in dividends. So that the narrative is, the public narrative is one of irresponsible borrowing in order to fund unrealistic dividend or inappropriate dividend returns. Now, that isn't really a fair narrative at all if you consider it in more detail and look at the actual complexities of what's been done and the different timeframes in which decisions were made. But nonetheless, it's a very, very easy stick with which to beat the private sector and private investors in water companies where those debt levels get up to levels that they're struggling to manage and deal with.
Excellent. Veronica, something to add?
If I may also to comment on this one, because, well, first of all, in Via Pribina, we are financed by corporate bonds and have a very close interaction with the rating agency. So there is, and with the bondholders, there's a lot of scrutiny in terms of meeting all the renewal programs and technical requirements that are imposed on us. So this is coming not only from the government, but also from the rating agency as well as from the bondholders. So we cannot really do whatever we want. And then on the other hand, within Meridian, we have a quite large experience with raising so-called green bonds, which are associated with financings that meet specific sustainable development goals and environmental requirements, usually also supported by EIB. So basically, these projects can be financed by bonds. I think that's the outcome, but you need to make sure that the contractual framework is very well treated. And at the same time, and I think we have only briefly touched the point of environmental and social impacts of the projects, because the type of investors that we are working with are, I know Slovakia is probably not that, it's not yet normal to look into environmental social impacts, but globally in all the projects, these aspects are looked very, very strictly, and you need to put these considerations in the project management very early on. You need to consider them, and then you are able to raise sufficient amount of debt abroad.
Thank you very much. I'm looking at my watch, and actually we have come to the end of the time allocated to this panel. It looks like, based on the international experience, there is no one preferred form of ownership structure for such water management companies. What is important is the regulation and the strategy of the government and political support for that, something which should be long-term and predictable and transparent. And it's also important that these companies can bring innovation into their management and work in the way which would be basically at the same level as private for-profit companies. So I think that's, let's say, is the conclusion. Thank you so much for joining us, Veronica, Josh, Sean, and thank you, and I think big thank you to you. Now I guess my time is over, takže ja tým pádom končím moju úlohu a predávam slovo naozaj profesionálnej moderátorke. Nech sa páči,
ďakujem
Lenka.
veľmi pekne. Ja to len ukončím, teda ďakujeme veľmi pekne aj za tento panel a teda spolu moderátorstvo Vazilovi Hudakovi, bývalému ministrovi hospodárstva a viceprezidentovi Európskej investičnej banky. Ďakujem veľmi pekne, že ste sa zhostili tejto úlohy a samozrejme aj našim speakerom v poslednom paneli. Za mňa teda ďakujem veľmi pekne, že ste boli súčasťou našej konferencie, aby som teda prešla, aby som sa ešte aj prihovorila našim divákom, ktorí nás sledovali na YouTube kanáli ta3. Predpokladám, že ešte budete mať otázky aj po konferencii, tak ako zvyknete mať po našich ďalších konferenciách, alebo teda predošlých konferenciách, ktoré sme mali. Budeme sa snažiť ich zodpovedať aj následne, alebo teda naši hostia. Ďakujeme veľmi pekne za to, že ste nás sledovali. Ako som spomínala, budeme teda informovať o tejto konferencii v rámci nášho celého spravodajstva, alebo teda celého dňa v rámci spravodajstva a spravodajskej televízie ta3. A teda tú sumárnu reportáž poskytneme v rámci hlavných správ o 18:30. Ďakujeme veľmi pekne, ako sme tu spomenuli aj ten marec 2025, kedy sme mohli zorganizovať aj ďalšiu konferenciu, kde budeme teda vládu trošku konfrontovať s tými sľubmi v rámci peňazí, ktoré sú veľmi dôležité na podporu vodohospodárstva na Slovensku, takže verím, že tá spolupráca bude pokračovať. Ďakujem teda, že sme mali možnosť aj byť na východe Slovenska v apríli, ako som si pozrela. V apríli, 16. apríla sme boli v Košiciach, teraz sme v Bratislave, uvidíme, ako to teda bude v budúcom roku aj s tými sľubmi vlády. Ďakujeme veľmi pekne všetkým vám, ktorí ste tu dnes boli s nami. Verím, že ste mali teda užitočný deň v rámci tých informácií, aj v rámci networkingu a pozývam vás teraz na krátky networking po a teda na také krátke občerstvenie. Ďakujeme veľmi pekne, že ste boli s nami. Pekný deň.